welcome everyone to the hydropower and nexus panel. I'm Oliver Hensengert. I co-convened this panel together with Naho Miramashi, who you can see in the program as the panel chair and speaker. Unfortunately, Naho couldn't make it today. Neither could Joachim Ojendahl, who is listed as our discussant, but we still have 3 papers. We'll start with Giuseppina Siciliano, followed by Diana Suhadiman, and then myself. And I'll hand over to Giuseppina straight away.
So hello everybody. My presentation is about hydropower development, natural resource allocation between competing users and uses, and I'm going to present a particular case study which is about a large dam in Cambodia, Kam Chai Dam. So I'm going to give you an overview of the importance of large dams development in low and middle income countries, and why there is a connection between large dams development environment and development issues. First of all, there is a global resurgent interest for large dams development to reduce energy poverty on one side, so it has a very important aim in terms of development, but also it's very important to mitigate global climate change, because from hydropower you can produce clean energy. So there are two. So they are justified, the development of large dams, they are justified using this development and global climate change mitigation purposes. There are a lot of new dams which are developed in different countries, and the Africa and Southeast Asia are the most. Africa and Asia are the most are the countries where more dams are being developed and built in the following years. There are more than 150 new projects in Africa in 54 different countries, and in Southeast Asia there will be 72 more or less 72 new projects in Laos, 10 in Sarawak, Malaysia, and more than 50 in Cambodia, new projects in Cambodia. And so today I'm going to speak about the Cambodia case study and the Kam Chai Dam, which is part. The study of the Kam Chai Dam is part of a bigger project, which is called China Goes Global, a comparative study of Chinese hydropower dams in Africa and Asia. And I'm working on this project at SOAS together with Frauke Urban. And this is the first comparative analysis of the environmental, social, and economic political implications of Chinese hydropower dams in low and middle income countries. And we try to compare the impacts of different case studies. In particular, we have 2 case studies in Africa, Nigeria and Ghana, and 2 case studies in Southeast Asia, Malaysia and Cambodia. And we use the political ecology of the Asian drivers conceptual framework, which is based on the analysis of the control over the access to natural resources by different stakeholders, and especially institutional actors, and looking at how the control, natural resources such as land, water, and energy are controlled by different stakeholders in the different case studies. And in terms of methodology, we use individual interviews, but also focus group discussion with different stakeholders, such as affected communities and dam builders from China and from the local case studies, and also the government institutions. And to analyze the focus group discussion that they use, we use the NVivo 10. And so this is the conceptual framework. While we are looking at Chinese dams, we are looking at Chinese dams in low and middle income countries, because China is the world's largest hydropower dam builder in terms of number and size of dams, and also investment sums and global coverage. And more than 330 Chinese overseas dams are built in Asia and Africa, and of which 57% are in Asia, and 40% in Southeast Asia, and 26% are in Africa. and the biggest builder is Sinohydro, as we can see here from this data from International Rivers. 42% of Chinese dams built in Africa and Asia, they are built by Sinohydro, which is a Chinese dam builder. So let's go into the detail of the case study. I'm going to present just Cambodia because this panel is about the Mekong region, and so in terms of electricity, Cambodia has a severe shortage of electricity, and only 31.1% of the population has energy access in Cambodia today. In 2012, sorry. Today maybe is a little bit increased, but actually they have problem of energy access today as well. And Kanchai Dam is the first large dam built in Cambodia. It is located on the Kanchai River within Bokor National Park, so the dam is actually in a natural reserve. And as I said before, it has been built by Sinohydro through a BOT contract, which is a build, operate, transfer contract, which means that the hydropower dam belongs to the Chinese builder for 44 years, and after 44 years, in 2050, it will be transferred to the Cambodian government. So, which means that Sinohydro, in particular the Chinese, they are responsible for the maintenance and the management of the dam for 44 years. So they are also responsible for the mitigation strategies. They are also responsible for consultation processes with the local population and other management issues, and also the environmental mitigation strategies, for example. There's not be resettlement in the area because all the different communities, they are located downstream of the dam, and upstream of the dam there is the national park. But there has been a lot of impacts on the local population, and in particular the affected population are mainly bamboo collectors, people that live, that produce bamboo baskets using bamboo from the forest. So they are collecting non-timber forest products for the production, and also fruit sellers to tourists, because this is also a tourist area on the river, on the Kanchai River. There are people, tourists going there and enjoying the river and the vegetation in the Bokor National Park. And also plantation growers, and in particular durian plantation growers. The dam has been funded by Chinese Exim Bank with 600 million aid package to Cambodia. This is a map of the area. Kanchai Dam is located in Bokor National Park, and as you can see, there are no communities upstream of the dam, and all the communities are located downstream of the dam. And the green dots are the communities that we interviewed doing the field work for the analysis. These are some technical details of Kanchai Dam, and the important thing is to look at the electricity supply, because most of the electricity which is produced by the dam is exported, is not used in the rural areas where people are living actually, but is exported to cities, and in particular to Kampot town, to Phnom Penh and Sihanoukville province, which are the more touristic areas of Cambodia, but also for their use in the main capital for industrial production and urban development. These are some details of the field work. We interviewed affected local communities at the dam sites using focus groups discussion. In particular, we did 10 focus group discussions, and then we used semi-structured interviews to interview affected individuals from local communities. We carried out 24 interviews with men and women, and also we interviewed 19 institutional actors, including national and local government, NGOs, cyanohydro regulators and financiers of the dam, and using semi-structural interviews. As I said before, the methodology we used is based on the in vivo 10 software. So we try to use theme and sub-theme to code the different interviews, and as you can see here from this table, the main theme and sub-theme has been related to the social and ecological impacts of the dam, but also we looked at interaction and communication, consultation process, participation of the local communities into the decision-making process of the dam construction, and in particular we looked as well at the livelihood changes, and if there's been an improvement of livelihood for the local population, decreasing of livelihood, or shifting livelihood strategies between different type of activities. And so in this table you can see that there are different sources and references. References are how many times the affected communities they spoke about the different theme, and according to this analysis, we can see here, this is the main result of the analysis, that there were some issues that they were considered very important for the local population in terms of access to natural resources. For example, energy access, it was one of the main problems or complaint of the local population, because the affected communities we interviewed, some of them, they don't have energy access. And the ones that have energy access, actually they import energy from Vietnam at very high prices. So people they're complaining, they don't understand why, even if they can see the dam actually, because it's very close to their houses, why they don't get any electricity from the dam, and why they have to import electricity from Vietnam or Thailand at very high prices. And another point was, and this is very important, the access to local resources. Actually, there has been land enclosure, so people now cannot access the forest, which is in Bokor National Park. The forest, non-timber forest products from the forest, they were used for livelihoods for the local population. Bamboo collectors, for example, now they have to travel, they have to spend more money, and they have to travel a long way to collect the bamboo for their livelihoods, and they didn't receive any compensation for that. But also, so energy access is an issue, food access is an issue, because, for example, now there is less, people can fish, cannot fish as before, and they have to buy fish in the market, so they rely more on the market for the food provision, so that there's been a commodification of food. And also the water access is a problem in terms of the flow of the water, which is controlled now by cyanohydro, and this causing problem with the tourism, because there's been a huge increase of the tourist presence in the area due to the reduced flooding from the river. So these are some, from this analysis, from the analysis of the interviews and focus group discussions, we actually were able to try to have an idea of the main negative and positive impacts of the dams, the Kanchai Dam. And in terms of land access, for example, the main problem is land enclosure. The fact, as I said before, that people, they cannot access the forest to collect non-timber forest products. And then another problem was forest access. So there is a reduced access to non-timber forest products. They have to go very far away. So there is an increased distance to access these products, and also they have to pay more, because now they have to pay fees for a boat. They need a boat to cross the reservoir to go to another part of the forest to collect the same amount of bamboo they were collecting before. So there is a reduced livelihood for the local population. In terms of food, there is a reduced food self-sufficiency, in the sense that now people, they rely more on the market for food provision. So there has been a commodification of food. There is limited energy access. Not all the people from the communities, they can access energy, even if they live close to the dam. and there is a decreased water flow and quality. The quality of the water is decreased. In terms of positive impacts, there has been positive impacts from some of the communities, in particular the durian growers, because there is less flooding, and the trees they can resist for a longer period of time because there is less flooding. So for them, there's been a positive impact from the construction of the dam, and also there is an improved access to markets through the construction of new roads. So in terms of food provision, the fact that they can access the markets, they can get more food from these markets. And also there is an improvement in terms of access to roads, because due to the construction of the dam, the builders, they had to build new roads, and now they can travel easier than they were doing before. So in terms of land enclosure, so the idea of this research was to try to see what are the main competition in the use of local resources between the affected communities and different stakeholders. And from these results, there is a huge competition between dam builders in terms of land use, access to land, between dam builders and the government and the local population that were using the forest for their livelihoods. And in particular, the fact that people that didn't receive any compensation from this land enclosure, this caused a lot of conflicts between the local population and the dam builders and the local governments. So here, this is a summary of the main results of this particular case study. And as we can see here, there's been a loss of 2,291 hectares of protected forests and bamboo habitats in the area, loss of livelihoods and lack of alternative livelihood strategies. So any mitigation strategy has been implemented in the area by the Chinese contractors, but also from the local government. There is poor energy access. Many villagers do not have energy access to electricity. In terms of the environmental impact assessment, the process violated the Cambodian law, because the assessment was approved 7 months after the dam was in operation. So it was completely unuseful in terms of mitigating, in terms of the decision-making process. And to implement some mitigation strategies. In terms of local participation, there's been little local participation, and the people, they didn't know very well what was going on when they saw the Chinese starting the construction process in the area. And mitigation measures, they were not put in place by the local government, and there was no compensation provided to non-timber forest product collectors. And these are some of the quotes from the affected communities about access to natural resources, land, energy, and also in terms of consultation and livelihood impacts. For example, in terms of land enclosures, some villagers, they said that before the construction of the dam, Sino-Hydro never banned the bamboo ground. Just now they catch our boat. If we do not have a boat, we cannot go to cut bamboo. So they have very big problems in terms of access the forest area for their livelihoods. In terms of livelihood impacts, during a focus group discussion with women in one of the community, the women said that they can collect less bamboo and spend more than before. Moreover, they said that they don't have other jobs to do beside that, collecting bamboo, and then there is a positive impact on durian trees. So some women, they said that there is no flood now, so our durian trees are not destroyed by flood, which is a positive impact of the construction of the dam. In terms of energy access, during a focus group discussion in another community, men said that most of the houses do not use electricity, they use kerosene lamp, and the price of electricity is too expensive, and we are not yet getting electricity for utilization. The price of electricity is very expensive because they have to import electricity from Vietnam and Thailand, as I said before. And in Cambodia there is one of the highest electricity price in the world. In terms of consultation, people, they said before they constructed the dam, I did not know about it. I just saw they cleared the land and I knew that they were constructing the dam. So it was completely, people were not aware of the construction of the dam. So they were not involved in the consultation process, in the consultation process. So these are the main conclusions, referring to Cambodia in particular, and so we have seen that there is an unequal distribution of costs and benefits between urban and rural areas. As I said before, the electricity which is produced from Kam Chai Dam is exported to rural areas for industrial production, is not used is exported to urban areas, is not used in the rural areas. In particular, is not used from the communities which are directly affected by the construction of the dam. So, and there was poor consideration of the needs of the poor because there was no consultation process, there was no participation of the local communities in the decision-making process. And so there is a need to improve the practices of both Chinese dam builders and the host countries, in this particular case Cambodia, to meet national priorities, which is reducing energy access and the needs of the poorest in society, which is something which has not been done in the case of Kam Chai Dam. And also energy access for the rural poor and energy poverty reduction in rural areas should be made a priority. Not just energy access at the national level, but there should be a strategy which is looking at different scales and levels, and so the benefits are more shared between different parts of rural urban areas, and also equally shared between different stakeholders. So these are some recommendations. As I said before, there should be a normalization between national and local priorities, and also some principles like this distributive justice should be taken into consideration during the construction of the dam to balance gains and losses at different geographical levels. And also procedural justice, which means include all relevant stakeholders at different levels, using open and active participatory process should be included in the decision-making process of large dams, and also differentiate challenges according to different groups of affected people. As we have seen in this case, there are different types of people, different communities. Durian growers, they had positive impacts. Bamboo collectors, they had negative impacts, but fruit sellers, they had other impacts. So it's very important to try to use methods that differentiate between different challenges, between different types of communities in rural areas, and to try to design mitigation strategies which are improving the situation of the local communities. And also, the last one is to try to develop energy policy and legislation on hydropower that include mitigation processes and safeguard processes for the local population. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
I worked on a similar type of project in Myanmar, about Mekong Dam, but the dam was never built yet in Myanmar because there was also a strong local opposition to the dam, and at the end, up to now, they won. So I would like to know exactly what did the local people think about the dam before, at the beginning of the project, and why it went this way and not another way?
Well, in this particular case, there was an opposition before the construction of the dam because a lot of people didn't know about about that. So it was a surprise for most of them. So they couldn't organize like a protest against the construction of the dam. There were some protests and conflicts after the construction of the dam because they banned the forest area. So a lot of people, the bamboo collectors, they went to the local governments asking for to be able to access the forest again. So there was some protests from the local communities, but after the construction of the dam. In this particular case. Yeah.
So none of the elites react to, none of them knew before that the dam would be constructed?
Maybe some of them they knew, but just few people, and the information was unclear, so they didn't know what to do actually, and there was like something organized, an organization of protests between different people. Was approved. The preparation started before, but was approved that 7 months after the construction of the dam started. Yeah.
Yeah, just wondered, during your fieldwork, did you get a chance to interview policymakers there and ask about their environmental impact assessment and how was their justification about that?
We interviewed some government representatives, and they said that finally it was approved and that it was well done, and that there was an inclusion of the mitigation strategy. So it's very difficult when you interview the government people to get some. So they said everything was done in a good way, and they were organizing the mitigation strategy. So they were not very critical about it. Yeah.
One question.
Yeah.
Was there any non-government organization there to support local people against those dam builders?
No, not in this particular case. No.
Did the MRC have any involvement, the Mekong River Commission and the EIA process, or anything to do
No.
with the
No. This was done really without participation of other groups, and actually they didn't apply any international standards for the realization of the environmental impact assessment. So it was done by an external consultancy, but it's just in Khmer. It's not translated in English. Just the summary is translated in English, so it's very difficult to understand what they put in the environmental impact assessment. Actually, a lot of mitigation strategies are not implemented yet, have not been implemented yet. And this is a particular case because in other cases, for example, we have a case study in Ghana and another case study in Malaysia, and a case study in Nigeria. In the case of Ghana, for example, they used international regulations, and the environmental impact assessment was very inclusive of the local population. They prepared it with using consultation, participation with the local population. But in Cambodia, it was completely an add-on to the project, completely unuseful.
I'm just curious about the table of costs and benefits. Was that based on people's perceptions, or was that taken
People.
from the EIA?
No, that was based on people perceptions, on the interviews and focus group discussions. Yeah.
I'm surprised that things like, because on the infrastructure one, you said it only had positive benefits of access to roads. I'm surprised other things were picked up by people who often express that once the road comes in, non-timber forest products and other forest products are then extracted by non-local people, and local people usually report that since the roads comes, we've lost most of our resources, and see it as a negative as well as maybe a positive. I'm surprised and other things I thought was a bit surprising that local people.
Yeah.
Was it done by a local NGO, or did you conduct
The road?
the actual survey of the people?
No, actually, we worked with the CDRI from Cambodia, And so we worked together, we prepared the questionnaire together, and then they conducted the field work, and we were there, we worked with them, in collaboration with them. And access to road, in this particular in the case of Cambodia, there are other cases, for example, Malaysia, where this point is very important, because for Bakundam in Malaysia, which is the other case study we conducted, in that case, the construction of the road is a problem, because then a lot of logging companies, they can access the forest, and they clear the forest, and they legally take. But in the case of Kanchai Dam, in this particular case, there are not such problems. There is a road, which is, so they have a better access to part of the forest, but it's there are not people interested in collecting bamboo, like people from companies or other people, other stakeholders that are interested on that, in this particular case. So the construction of the road was positive, in general was perceived as a positive thing, because they have a better connection with other communities as well. And there were some people saying that they had the negative impact because the roads pass from rice fields, for example, so they lose part of the rice fields, but they got the compensation, they were happy with the compensation. So.
All right. Thank you very much, Josefina.
F4. It's F4, right? To make it full screen. Yes. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. Today I will present some of the key findings from our paper that has recently been published in the GeoForum, entitled When Local Power Meets Hydropower, Reconceptualizing Resettlement Along the Nam Luang River in Laos. So first, I will briefly discuss about the current state of hydropower development in the lower Mekong basins, focusing mainly on the central positioning of resettlement in the Mekong hydropower debates in Laos in particular. As we can see from this map, Laos is a landlocked country with Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, China, Yunnan province, and Vietnam as its direct neighbor. After that, I will briefly describe about the Ten Hin Bun expansion project, which is part of the Ten Hin Bun power companies, and the making of Ban Kyo Senkam as the resettlement site. And next, I will illustrate and discuss how powerful and less powerful actors shape and reshape resettlement processes and outcomes, and how these further shape villagers' views, perceptions, and experiences on how resettlement has affected their life. Yeah, so Mekong hydropower is developing rapidly. According to the challenge program Water and Food, there are 36 dams in operation already in lower Mekong basin, in addition to 110 dams planned under construction or under licensing. Laos is at the forefront of this hydropower development, with 99 dams planned in the country, in addition to 17 dams already in operations. So we can see from this map there is so many dams planned in the lower Mekong basins, but most of the planned hydropower dams were concentrated in Laos and Cambodia, and much less in Vietnam and in Thailand. So while the benefits from hydropower development, while hydropower development could in theory benefit the country in terms of promoting its economic growth, there is also many are also concerned about the developments, how the development could negatively impact the local communities, both in terms of social and environmental impacts, with particular focus on the resettled communities. And resettlement has always been a major issue in Laos, both historically as well as in the present. While in the past, resettlement has always been driven by the state's political security concerns to move ethnic minority from the mountainous area and has nothing to do with hydropower development. In present day, resettlements continue to be presented as a core technology of state-based development planning in hydropower-induced resettlement. And partly complying with the way resettlement is presented as part of the core technology of state-based development planning, current discussion on the impact of hydropower development, especially with particular focus on resettlement, has the tendency to position local communities as a homogeneous group and give them the appearance of passive development recipients. And in this presentation, I would like to focus on the transition of the Nam Gunong from a river into a reservoir, and also presenting hydropower development as a technology of power by illustrating the different power relations and power struggle, not only between the dam developers and the local authorities, but also between the local communities in the 4 villages that was resettled into one resettled site, which is called Ban Keo Sengkam. So yeah, the Ten Hin Bun Power Company. The Ten Hin Bun Power Company, or THPC, comprises of 3 main shareholders: the Laos state-owned state enterprise or Electricity Du Lao, the Norway Nordic Hydropower Statkraft, and Thailand's leading private developer GMZ Bolisat Limited. In 1998, with $60 million ADB loan, the Ten Hin Bun Power Company initiated the Ten Hin Bun Power Projects, which is a run-of-the-river hydropower project with 210 megawatt installed capacity for electricity export to Thailand. And in 2011, the Ten Hin Bun Power Company started with the construction of the Ten Hin Bun expansion project with the aim to increase energy capacity of the Ten Hin Bun power project through the construction of a new hydropower dam in the Nam Gunong River. So if we can, from this map, the purple circle indicates the location of the dam that is constructed for the Ten Hin Bun expansion project, while the orange or red circle indicates the place of the resettlement site, which is Ban Keo Sengkam. Yeah, and in this presentation, I will focus mainly on the resettlement of 4 villages into one village, Ban Keo Sengkam. But of course, the Ten Hin Bun expansion project dam resettled more than these 4 villages. Yeah, so the development of the Ten Hin Bun expansion project has displaced in total more than 6,000 rural households, of which slightly more than 1,000 of these households inhabited Ban Keo Sengkam in 2011. In 2006, Ten Hin Bun Power Company representative investigated or conducted a comprehensive land survey in the area to identify the exact location where they are going to build the dam. And in 2007, the company staff visited the village head, deputy village head, as well as the village elders from the 4 villages that will be flooded through the construction of the dam. These 4 villages are Tambing, Sopchat, Ponkeo, and Sensi, to inform them about the need to be resettled following the dam construction. And in 2007, following the central government approval of the resettlement action plan, the Ten Hin Bun Power Company has also started with some infrastructure development in the proposed resettlement sites, which is the Nam Ngoi Valley and Nam Piat area. However, in the early 2008, the Boli Kamsai provincial authorities had made it clear to the company that they will reject the proposed resettlement site. The rejection was based on the Boli Kamsai province intention to establish a new district within the province. In order to be able to establish this new district, the provincial authority has to meet a population quota of 30,000 inhabitants in this new district. So obviously, if the provincial government let these 4 villages to be resettled outside the area of the province, this move will significantly deplete the provincial government intention to establish this new district, because it will also question whether or not they will be able to achieve the defined population quota for a new district. So for this reason, it opposed the 4 villages to be resettled outside its domain. And starting from this rejection, negotiation and discussion about the new resettlement sites started, but it was quite a long process because it was only concluded in the early 2011, or just 3 months before the actual resettlement take place. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that there are 4 villages that are resettled into one. These 4 villages are Ponkyo, Sensi, Tambing, and Sopchat. When we conducted our field research in the resettlement site, our key informant from each of the 4 villages confirmed that while all villagers from Ponkyo and Sensi preferred to be resettled in Bankyo Sengkam, this preference was shared by none of the villagers from Sopchat or Tambing. However, because the Ponkyo villager was closely allied with the district government, the Ponkyo village head was able to ensure that the final decision on the new resettlement site was made based on the preference made by Ponkyo villagers and to a certain extent also Sensi villagers. And this interaction between powerful and less powerful actors at the local community level is also most apparent in the shaping of the 4 zones representing the 4 original villages. The amount of land received by each household from the 4 villages was derived from a land survey in the resettlement site, divided into 4 zones representing the 4 original villages and the number of households in each village. Again, in this process of defining or redefining the location of each villages in the resettlement site, Ponkyo village got the first pick as to where they want to be relocated. Unequal access to land is also apparent from how the majority of villagers from from Tambing and Sopchat receive less than 1 hectare of land, as compared to 3 hectares of land they supposed to receive according to the resettlement action plan. And not to mention that this 1 hectare of land was located in a very steep slope with many large stones, which is not always suitable for cultivation. So, and about the villagers' views and perception and experience, depending on the villagers' access to adjacent river, some villagers thought that they have sufficient water supply, while others were concerned about potential water scarcity after resettlement. For instance, because Ponkyo villagers got the first pick about the location where they want to be resettled, they maintain their access to the Mekong River. So these villagers thought that even after the resettlement, they would have sufficient water supplies because they continue to have access to the river. As well as other villagers who have no longer direct access to the river, such as Sensi, Tambing, and Sopchat, they thought that there is too little water for too many households simply because they lost their access to the river. And about the gender dimension, we conducted focus group discussion with different women from the different women group from the different villages. And we see that the women in Ponkeo, for instance, are eager to adapt towards a more civilized lifestyle. When we discuss what they want in their new resettled village, they would focus on demand or requests such as central paved road, electricity poles, water tank, food and clothing, markets, hospitals, schools, and some mention even a beauty salon. More natural features such as small river was included only in the last minute when we questioned where they would find food. As for Tambing women, on the other hand, modern things are less present in their conception of an ideal lifestyle after resettlement. During our focus group discussion, they included garden, fruit trees, and paddy fields, along with schools and a health center as their main items for their ideal village. Our discussion also revealed that they are more concerned with the fact that they could not work hard as lacking lowland rice fields, compared to too much of a free time. So rooted in the transition of the Nam Mekong River into a reservoir and the 4 villages into one resettlement site, Ban Keo Sengkam, my presentation illustrates the different political positions taken by villagers, dam developers, and local government as active participants in the overall shaping of hydroscape. Viewing power as everywhere, it shows how powerful and less powerful actors define their strategies and determine resettlement processes and outcome. But most importantly, I think it also shows that villagers constitute not one body of those impacted by hydropower development, but rather as a myriad individual engaging in the transition through their different positions. So to just give you some illustration, this is the resettlement site. As we can see here, the villages were located more on the higher ground, so not all villages have direct access to the river, and the company has provided each of the village zone representing the 4 villages with access to water supply. But of course, this is only like one infrastructure for so many households, so that explains some of the villages' concerns that when about the water supply, because they lost their access to the river. Yes, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was very insightful. I have a number of questions. First, what is the ethnic identity of these people?
Mm-hmm.
Second, did they have any migration experience before this resettlement? And thirdly, were any alternatives offered to them? For example, could they just be compensated for their houses and their land and then move elsewhere than into the resettlement village?
Okay, so the first question, most the ethnicity of these villages, there are 4 villages. They're comprises of all different ethnic groups, but the Ponkeo and Sensi villages, they are dominated by Laulem, and for the other 2 villages, Tambing and Sopchat, there is like a composition of Laulem and the other ethnic minorities, a compilation of ethnic minorities such as Aka, and the other I can look it up in the paper.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, because it's quite a complicated compilation, and about whether or not they have been migrated before, we conducted the village a historical study before and after resettlement, and because of the location of the village, which is adjacent to the Nam Mekong River, most of the villages. From the village history perspective, they haven't been migrated, but there are some people in the village that has been migrated in terms of internal resettlement. So initially they lived in the mountainous area, and due to government internal resettlement, they have to move down, and they got merged with another village, and then there is like another government policy on, I forgot what kind of policy, but then they merge into like 4 villages into one. So I think this kind of thing happened, but not in terms of the 4 villages as an individual village, but the people who kind of experience this process of state domination or state policy strategies to control ethnic minorities. And the third question is
about
the compensation. Yeah.
Compensation.
In this presentation, I look mainly on the resettlement, but as I said, these are only 4 villages that are to be resettled. But there are also other villages, I think 8 more villages, which are to be resettled and also to be relocated. And for the resettled villages, usually they have the company have a standard procedure, like they will register the asset of the different household in the different villages, and then they will say, okay, this is your asset, and then you may choose either you take the money for this amount of money, or you get this new house. And of course, and again, I didn't elaborate it in this presentation, but in terms of powerful and less powerful actors, it's also interesting to see how this process takes place, because due to its close connection to the district government, for instance, the Ponkyo village head was able to inform the villagers that they have to inform the company staff about all assets they have, including the upland land or everything, so that it can be notified and listed and recalculated into the amount of compensation that they receive. But like for instance, for another village, Sopchat and Tambing, because they don't know why these people coming and asking about their asset, they were thinking that this was done for government taxation purposes. So then they didn't tell everything. When they receive less compensation, it's hard really to argue, because the information comes from themselves. But the fact is that because they were less powerful or less connected, they simply do not have idea why these people come and asking them a lot of information. And probably in the past, the same thing happened in terms of land tax, because in Laos, I mean, land registration took place in late 1970s, early 1980s, and when people are asked to register their lands, they were told that that registration will give them rights to use the land. But what happened also next to that is that they were linked to the land taxation system. So I think that's also the history of a village development, or a farmers or local communities development, that there is this sense of mistrust when government or company staff coming asking about their asset. They simply could not believe that it will be calculated in terms of the amount of compensation that they have. And also there's another issue of the number of the family members. So if you say you have 12 children, or you have 2 children, you'll get a different amount of compensation. And again, the Ponkyo village, knowing about these rules from before, they could easily manipulate that information. Or they could say, we still have elderly parents, just to add the numbers. So there's a lot of manipulation. And
I'm doing more or less the same questions that Guido had. But yeah, I found it quite interesting how before the Lao government resettled uplanders to the lowlands, and now they are flooding the lowlands, and they resettled in more mountainous areas again. It's all over the place in all Laos. But I'm still another question. You mentioned the ethnic identity of the people, and according to one of the photos you showed, how houses are more or less standardized, right?
Yes,
They are
it's like a
standard
suburb.
Lao style. So I was wondering how far the non-Lao population are discussing the fact that they are now living in Lao houses and not in houses they used to live, and because the space is important also for rituals, etc. So how does it change the perception of space?
Yeah, from our interviews and focus group discussion, we did not really find a patterns that they complain or that there is a concern about the like standardized house, because in general they are quite happy with the house that they have. What concerned them is mainly their access to the river that they lost, as well as their lack of ability to go back to their old villages, because their old villages were flooded, but that doesn't mean that they could not go back, because some of the villagers still have to leave their cattle there. So then they will arrange within the community, like, okay, this village will leave 20 cattle in the original villages, and then they will arrange who have to go back and forth to take care of the cattle. So I think in terms of houses, we do not find a pattern that they are, in general, I think they take it more as a modernized or civilized emphasis of the, oh, we have this house, we get money to buy television, we get motorbike, we have access to road, all this modern perception of after resettlement. But at the same time, you also hear other people saying like, well, this is actually only all temporary. It doesn't really change our lifestyle, because what we want, like the original resettlement site in before the Polikamsai provincial government changed or rejected the original resettlement site. The original resettlement site was in the lowland field. So the other two villages, Sopchat and Tambing, was very happy about the original resettlement sites, because they see it as their way to develop from upland farmings to lowland rice field. And that's not, I don't think it is because they don't like upland farmings, but it is more because the government exercise more and more control for upland cultivation because of this negative stigma of shifting cultivation. So then people get punished when they take when the government found out that they still have field on the upland. So I think it's more like, okay, then we'll move to lowland and we still have our rice field without making too many hassle how to evade the government stuff.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up something that you talked about. The resettlement process is called technology of state-based planning, as opposed to hydropower development, which is in your abstract as being a development technology or a technology of power. And give a little bit of context, because I've researched this project over quite a few years on Turn Hindu. But a bit of context that would have been useful was that it was originally financed by the ADB in its first phase, and at the time it was their star project that they said was a win-win-win project, because it was good socially, it was good environmentally, and there was no resettlement required. And they made a big thing about it, because the first phase was just a head pond where the people lost their riverbank gardens. There were no houses had to be moved, even though people were impacted downstream, but they didn't count downstream people as impacted. Now they're all being moved into similar kind of large villages. But the interesting thing that I don't know if you've considered, perhaps you have, perhaps it is something you haven't yet considered, is that at that time in the phase one, the first that was a best case ADB perfect project, the company, the Turn Hindu company, was pretty much in charge, and they had quite a free rein on doing their resettlement in these small villages. There was some resettlement, even though they said there wasn't. But they brought in the state to do the company's bidding at the provincial and district level. So you could say at that time it was the Turn Hinbun company that had the power to mobilise the state.
No, but I think
well,
it.
Can I just
Yeah.
finish the point? But what seems to have happened is now the company is being mobilised by the state to do its bidding in these much larger resettlements. As you say, it's a technology of state-based power, but it seems the power dynamics have shifted between Turn Hinbun Phase 1 and the expansion project in a spectacular way.
No, I think there's also, because in this presentation my key message is that we should not see local communities as a homogeneous group, and I think we should do the same about the state. Because when I said like who has power, it's the state. Is it, when you are talking about the state, who are they? Is it the Ministry of Energy and Mines, or is it the provincial authority? Is it the district authority? Is it the Lao Revolutionary Party Committee? I mean, there's different segmentation of the states, and in this particular case, I think in this 4 resettlement site, I'm not saying that the Turn Hinbun Power Company loses its power, but it's more about, because probably if you go to the national level government, they would still insist that the resettlement site is not changed because they have agreed on the resettlement action plan. And if you look only at that point, then you will say, okay, there is the Turn Hinbun Power Company powers prevail to just choose where they want to resettle these local communities. But at the same time, when the resettlement plan are started to get implemented, then the company has to deal with provincial and district authorities. And there is another phase of the state, another segment of the state. And I think in this, we didn't really elaborate on that part, but I think if the Turn Hinbun Power Company was wise enough not to take it up to the national government, because technically they could do that, because their resettlement action plan was approved by the central government in 2007, and the provincial government rejected it in the early 2008. So legally speaking, they could as well say, no, we insisted we will go this way because we got the approval from the central government. But they know that they couldn't do that because that will almost literally jeopardize the entire resettlement process, because they know once the resettlement process started, they need a backup from both provincial and district government. So they won't play around with that. And by bringing national government, which actually is not there.
And is THPC paying for it all?
Sorry?
Is THPC paying for it all?
No, I think we heard that they paid for they have already bought a lot of lowland rice fields in the original resettlement site, and they couldn't. One of the complaints that they raised is that according to the resettlement action plan, each individual household will have access to 3 hectares of rice field, and when the provincial government changed and partly with the district government changed the resettlement site to Ban Keo Sengkam, that is one of the things that the HPC say that land issue, that land distribution will be an issue because it's not enough for everyone. And it's the steep slope and everything. It's not only that farmers could not have access to lowland paddy field, but it's also because even on the upland area, it's not enough for everyone. So I think this particular case also, because often in the Mekong hydropower debates, we always picture power company or private developers as the most powerful actors. But I think this case study also showed that you can also contest them, and there is also other powerful actors playing.
So why do they put the 4 villages together rather than in one site, rather than 2 sites or 3 sites or 4 sites?
Because
when they do clump them together, is there evidence in other examples around the country of where the tension between the different groups who've been forced to come together, especially if they're kind of clustered within this new town, still according to their old towns, about how you get the social integration and harmony?
I think the social integration and harmony is not part of the indicator where a company designed resettlement action plan. But I think in this particular case, I think the company is also forced to put the 4 villages into one resettlement site due to the provincial government's interest to establish a new district. Because these 4 villages comprises of more than 1,000 1,000 households. And if they spread it again, then it will almost repeat the same issue with the provincial government. Because one of the basic reasons why the provincial government rejected is because they want to keep these 4 villages in one district to be able to establish a new district. So if they spread it around, then they will not be able to achieve the population quota.
Just a very brief remark. It is very common. This practice, whatever the reasons in this specific cases are, but I'm also started working in an area in Laos where there's resettlement, and it's very common to put 6, 7, 8 villages into a new spot together. And I have no idea what the explicit idea about this is, but if you think that village identities are the most important identity for many Lao people, must often more important than ethnic identity. And you see that this basically undermines the social structure and forces people into out of village autonomy. That's what I perceive is happening.
And allied to that, usually they take away all their local names and give them new names like Aljalan Patna, the very progressive developed village. So they are removing their identity.
Or kilometer 15.
Yeah.
But I think in this particular case, which also interesting, is that when I mentioned Ban Keo Senkam, when we first arrived, we thought, oh, that's the name of the village, of the resettlement village, called Ban Keo Senkam. But actually, after we interview all the different villages from the 4 villages, we gathered that Keo Senkam comes from Pon Keo, Keo from Pon Keo, and Sen from Sensi. So the way the villagers established that new name is based only on the 2 villages that preferred that the resettlement site was chosen in that particular location. And the way the other 2 villages view it is that, yes, they are the one who count and we don't, because our village name is not even put in the resettlement village. So there's also, I think, a sense of identity that the Pon Keo, because it's Pon Keo's villagers and Sensi villagers' preference to be resettled there, then they put some of the name of their villages into the new village, while the other 2 villages kind of, well, we don't want to be resettled here, so we don't want to put it as part of the new village name.
Right. This one connects to a large extent to what Josefina and Diana have said before. And in contrast to what it says in the program, I'm not looking at Laos and Myanmar at all. I'm just looking at Cambodia. Some of this is work in progress, particularly around issues of identity and critical regionalism. Other aspects of this work go back quite a long time. So some of this, what I will be presenting, is quite established already. Others is clearly work in progress, in fact work that has only begun quite recently. So quick background, really quick, because Josefina and Tiana have addressed some of this. Hydropower in the greater Mekong sub-region, really to meet various purposes, to meet domestic demand, such as in Cambodia, or which is particularly prevalent in Laos, also to sell this hydropower abroad, in particular to Thailand. Hydropower is a cornerstone of the GMS-wide connected grid, the power trade arrangement, and it is part of a renewables discourse. So the primary justification for hydropower today is really the clean development, the low carbon development, climate change, and the Kyoto Protocol with the CDM mechanism has been one of the key drivers for this. And we see in the case of the Kamchai Dam, for instance, that Kamchai has been registered successfully under the CDM mechanism, even though NGOs have argued against this for quite some time. Funding for hydropower has changed quite dramatically over the past decades, really. Much of this used to come from public funding, particularly from donors in the Development Assistance Committee of the OECD. So it was public money, and whenever donors wanted to change in trajectory, for instance, the insertion of environmental sustainability mechanisms from the late 80s or early 90s, then this had to be reflected in the way these hydropower plants were built. This has changed quite a lot with DAC money being largely withdrawn from primary dam finding, and much of the funding is now coming from private or large state-owned companies in the global south, so China, Vietnam, but also in the Mekong and Malaysia, and for example, and Thailand as key source countries from where the infrastructure companies originate from, but also where the financing comes from. And Western companies can mostly be seen as delivering parts or turbines, for instance, but the key infrastructure is no longer built by those old established companies. The IA processes are all there in law, but they're largely top-down and have a lack of public consultations. Local communities are often styled as helpless victims who don't know what to do, and that's certainly true in many cases, but we've seen in the past couple of years also increasing protest against hydropower dams, communities being informed that hydropower dams are coming, and some of these protests have been quite violent, and in some cases they have led to the suspension of projects, or to the suspension of projects. And currently I'm increasingly focusing on the agency of local communities, knowledge generation strategies, resistance strategies, etc. And that's the part of the work that is still fairly new. In terms of the nexus, just briefly, this is not my graph, but land, water, energy nexus. Different forms of energy or different forms of development interventions have different consequences for the nexus. And we'll see that hydropower is central to both land in terms of ecosystem services, for instance, or land property regimes, but also the way that water is managed, and as well as energy. And there has been for some time now being calls for the co-management of land, water, and energy in hydropower projects, but we see that a focus is on energy outputs rather than on looking at how this affects water, ecosystem services. The cleanliness of the river, but also cultural aspects such as river as dwelling places for deities. So we see in this in hydropower scalar trade-offs between different environmental goals, for instance, so global climate change versus local ecosystems protection. The question is which is prioritized, or how to prevent trade-offs between the global climate protection goals and local ecosystem protection goals. So we have the global agenda, but also national development agendas with national development plans to expand energy grids, to expand irrigated agriculture, etc. And then we have the very much local effects on local communities. So local communities tend to suffer disproportionately from hydropower plants, which prioritize national development targets as well as, in terms of the climate change debate, for instance, global protection targets. But the question is then, those local communities who have put up resistance against hydropower dams more or less successfully. What do they do? Where do they get the knowledge from? What are their discourses they generate? What are their strategies, directions? And what are the hurdles that they have to overcome? And just very briefly, the conceptual thinking behind this looks at critical regionalism, political ecology, environmental justice issues. Critical regionalism, something that investigates the reaction of local communities to external development interventions. So what processes are triggered within communities that experience an external intervention, such as a hydropower dam? How do local communities engage with globalizing and modernizing forces from multinational corporations and the state? How do local communities attempt to maintain or strengthen local identity, local distinctiveness? Do they develop alternative development discourses, and what are the issues for identity and community building projects, but also in terms of splitting up communities that have different, perceived different impacts of hydropower dams? Political ecology draws on concepts, particularly of the resource frontier. Keith Barney has applied this to Laos and Cambodia in particular, where the resource frontier styles countries as the frontier area is an area of relational zones of economy, nature, and society, where we see zones styled as untapped reservoirs that can be exploited with quite substantial windfall gains. These are then spaces of capitalist transitions where we see new forms of property regimes imposed, new forms of legality imposed on communities that were relatively isolated, certainly not often entirely isolated and cut off from modernity, but relatively isolated communities. And this endangers in particular the customary rights and traditions of indigenous communities. So communities then become part of larger processes. In particular, they face a very complex multi-level governance situation where they face interests of local governments in building this hydropower plant, national governments, the interests of multinational corporations and financiers, and often also international organizations such as the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank that assist in certain projects. They face new property rights, resettlement, and how do they cope? What are their resources to counter these processes, or some of the questions that come from this. Very briefly, on the context of hydropower development in Cambodia, the plan by the government is to connect 70% of households to the grid by 2030, to reduce the very high electricity costs and the very frequent outages. The government prioritizes in this hydropower and coal, and the lead agency is what used to be the Ministry of Industry, Mines and Energy, and is now the reformed Ministry of Mines and Energy. Cambodia has created, in order to do that, Cambodia has created a very liberal investment regime that actively seeks to attract foreign investment into the hydropower sector. The government gives payment guarantees for hydropower and coal investment. It reduces all perceived obstacles, such as environmental protection mechanisms. It has a very hostile attitude towards environmental NGOs. And CDM is used as a financial incentive for hydropower investment. Public funding for renewables is there also: biomass, biofuel, biogas, solar energy, etc., and wind, but that comes only from donors, but not from the government itself. So government funding for renewable energies indeed only there for hydropower investment. To look a little bit into how hydropower projects are approved and what the power relations are between the government and corporations. we can look at this. The Prime Minister tends to approve and publicly announce hydropower projects on high-profile occasions, such as the Kamchai Dam. This usually means that these projects, although they're just announced, will happen, regardless of the upcoming EIA and other approval processes. Those companies that usually capture these hydro projects are close allies of the governing party. These are often the usual suspects. We have close personal links between the Prime Minister himself and, for instance, Lau Mon-kin, a senator for the ruling party, who has various business interests. So the Kamchai Dam, for instance, is built by Sino Hydro Kamchai, on the board of which we see Lau Mon-kin and his wife, Chung Sophia. Lower Sisan 2 is built by Hydro Lansam and Gitman's Royal Group. So we have cooperations here between the politically well-connected Cambodian companies and, in this case, 2 Chinese companies. We then go to formal approval processes. The hydropower developer recruits an EIA agency. Cambodian EIA agencies are often run by former government employees, so there's a clear conflict of interest there. And the hydro developer also conducts is in charge of arranging the planning for CDM. So this is not an independent process that would be taken out of the hands of the hydropower company, as is the case in other countries. But here the hydropower developer, the Cambodian government, withdraws entirely from this approval process and leaves it in the hands of the hydropower company, which has an incentive, for instance, to reduce costs, to speed up the process, etc. So also in there, the processes are quite flawed. Then the Ministry of Environment then is formally in charge of approving both EIA and CDM mechanisms. There are 2 different departments who do that, the Department of EIA Review and the Climate Change Department. Formally, CDM projects must have undergone an EIA, so these are connected, which means that when the EIA is in violation of Cambodian law, the CDM would also be in violation of Cambodian law, so this would normally stop these projects from happening. Then the final approval rests with the Ministry of Mines and Energy. Once all the various ministries have given their respective approvals, and in the case of the environmental approvals, the Ministry of Environment is in charge of that. And if we look a little bit more in detail into these later 2 organizations, within the Ministry of Mines and Energy, we have the General Department of Energy, which has the hydropower bureaucracy, and within the Ministry of Environment, we have the Department of EIA Review and the Climate Change Department. The problem is that both look very differently at hydropower and what the purpose is, what it is supposed to do, and how it should be designed. So the Ministry of Mines and Energy, or the General Department of Energy, looks at national development targets for energy promotion, for instance. It promotes coal and hydropower, and it largely believes in the incompatibility of environmental sustainability and economic development, whereas things are slightly different in the Ministry of Environment. So the Department of EIA Review is certainly not an anti-hydropower agency, but it believes that it is possible to construct environmentally and socially sustainable hydropower, and certainly to balance out national development targets and local protection needs. So in terms of the scalar trade-offs there, this is something that at least comes from interviews and official documentation of this particular department. The Climate Change Department very much looks at local sustainabilities, but it is also interesting to see that in terms of approving these large dams for the purpose of CDM certification, the Climate Change Department is not usually involved in that process. So it just gets the final documentation for approval, but it does not work with large hydropower companies who do that process independently without consulting with the Climate Change Department on that. So the climate change department just gets the final documentation, which it usually approves. So there is, in terms of norms and notions of sustainability, there are differences between these two ministries. Above the ministries, we have the National Climate Change Committee, which is chaired by the Environment Ministry. But within that structure, the Environment Ministry is outdone, if you want, by ministries who approve of larger hydropower projects. So the power balance within the Climate Change Committee certainly is not in favor of the Environmental Ministry. And these are some quotations from Environment Ministry documentation, which say that certain government ministries responsible for infrastructure or industrial and agricultural development see the need for EIA secondary to the need for development, and this is quotes only targeted at the Ministry of Mines and Energy. The authority of the Ministry of Environment to force through an environmental sustainability agenda is limited. The Climate Change Department is unable to enforce sustainability criteria against politically connected hydropower developers. So this is largely the process, the formal, but also the formal process within the Cambodian administration, but also the actual power balance tilted against the Environment Ministry. If we now look at some of the hydropower dams that are in the construction process or in the planning process, I'll start with Lower Sesan 2, which is built by Hydro Lansang in cooperation with the Royal Group. The purpose is electricity for domestic demand, but also export. EIA processes are inadequate. The interesting thing about that is that local communities have put up quite a resistance to this particular dam. And one of the things there is that communities in that area have been affected before, and they have been affected before by the Yali Falls Dam on the Vietnamese side. So they know what the effects are on hydropower dams. So in that sense, there has been prior knowledge in communities what hydropower means, that when hydropower developers come to local communities, make presentations about the benefits of hydropower dams, that this is not necessarily to be trusted. So local communities there have created quite a stir and have refused to, in parts, refused to move to the resettlement sites. Those who have moved have then complained that housing isn't adequate, for instance, because it doesn't comply with cultural criteria, etc. The communities there are mostly indigenous, are indigenous communities of various kinds, and some of the issues around there have been the burial grounds, the spirit forests, and the rivers as dwelling places of protective deities. So if communities are normally resettled, then this can be expressed in monetary terms, in terms of compensation, regardless of whether this is well done or badly done. But usually, if baseline surveys are done, if assets are surveyed and assessed, compensation is often done in monetary terms, or new villages are built, where houses are built, schools, hospitals, etc. in the ideal case. Or we have a sort of benefit sharing arrangement in which local communities get preferential access to electricity, for instance, not necessarily in Cambodia, but in other parts of the world where hydropower dams have been built. But in the case of these cultural issues, the question is, how does one resettle this? How is this expressed in resettlement processes? How is it compensated? How is it expressed in monetary terms, which is not really possible? So this have been some of the issues around resettlement in the Lower Sesan 2 area. Some of the impacts have been on local elections. For instance, the governing party has lost control of the local council. Community representatives have allied with media and with domestic NGO to create publicity around this issue. So they have both targeted the local government branches, but they have also allied with wider civil society and media to create visibility in this. I'm not going to say much about Kamkai because Josepina has talked about this much better and in much more detail. Maybe just briefly, there have been protests, Josepina has mentioned protests there. There have been also protests against the local government to release compensation payments, and we have seen alliances or cooperation between domestic and international NGOs to prevent CDM certification. The third dam I just want to briefly look at is the Stongchaeareng project, also built by Sino-Hydro. This has been perhaps the most violent protest in Cambodia to date, or the most violent protest that I have come across. Anyway, it's an area inhabited by ethnic communities as well, who have also been given advanced information on this dam, that the dam would happen. Well, one of the indications was that communities have seen Chinese personnel appearing in the area, which has raised suspicions. They have been informed by an NGO, which is called Mother Nature, which is co-founded by a Spanish national who has subsequently been deported by the Cambodian government. And this has consultants who work in Cambodia on environmental impact assessment have fed Mother Nature with information, who in turn has fed this on to local communities. So we had the creation of an information stream and knowledge stream for local communities about this dam. So whenever the construction companies attempted to move heavy machinery into the prospective reservoir area, communities have blocked access roads, and they have worked in shifts to almost round the clock to block these access roads and groups. There were hunger strikes by villagers and monks in front of the Chinese embassy in Phnom Penh. Sino-Hydro workers had to be escorted out of the area by military police. And the Prime Minister has suspended the dam last year and said this would not be, there would no decision be made until the next elections in 2018, or that is the latest information that I have. So coming back to local communities, who is governing the nexus, who is responsible for preventing trade-offs, it certainly appears that domestic bureaucracies are primarily responsible. One can hold also responsible, of course, multinational corporations, but certainly the way that EIAs are produced, that national development plans are shaped, that the energy sector is shaped, the role that EIA has, the way that multinationals are forced to comply with domestic environmental legislation, for instance, it's certainly something that is up to the national government to enforce and to decide. And local communities in Cambodia, anyway, really face an increasingly complex multi-level structure and certain hostile national governments in the Cambodian case. So the co-management of energy, water, ecosystem services is something that has been called for a long time, but is not practiced, certainly not by the Cambodian government. The trade-offs between different development goals are quite substantial, where local community concerns are not taken seriously as a matter of course, but only when significant resistance is occurring in local communities. Shouldn't be there now. But local communities are also not necessarily always passive victims, but they can put up quite a resistance, but usually with the assistance of NGOs and media, etc., who feed them information. So they have influenced electoral outcomes. They have created links with media. They have created links with domestic and international NGOs, in particular international rivers in the case of hydropower, and have targeted both local and national governments and dam builders. And in terms of then critical regionalism, so focus on the agency of communities, what does this tell us, or where could this research agenda then go? So I'm looking at discourses of that local communities themselves create, circuits of knowledge? How does knowledge travel? Where do local communities get the knowledge from? How does this inform discourses? What are the impacts of identity, culture, community building? What are the impacts on resistance strategies and network buildings, perhaps between different communities who have suffered the same fate? And do local communities have any role then in forcing governments to balance off these trade-offs in the food, water, energy nexus and defending it? Thank you. Those are some of the publications that have come out of previous research. And we have time for questions. And if you have any questions for Diana and Josepina for the theme itself, we're happy to discuss this interview as well. And maybe everything was answered by Josepina and Diana. Okay.
Because you framed this around the water energy nexus rather than the donors, especially German donors, the water food energy nexus.
Right.
And that came as a sort of a new idea and was thrown out there a couple of years ago. My question is, from your analysis and looking at various projects around climate change and hydropower development and green mechanism, do you think this appetite by the donors has got much legs? Will it carry on, or is it just going to fall by the wayside like other previous buzzwords that occasionally appear in the development lexicon?
I think that's something we probably need to see. There are quite big conferences at the moment around the nexus and large government-funded projects around the nexus. My understanding is that the nexus idea was created to make it politically more palatable in comparison to IWRM, which was the reigning concept before, but which has been rejected as a sort of donor-imposed discourse on local government, which has been inhibited, the Mekong River Commission in particular. I'm not sure whether nexus is more accepted or not, but it doesn't seem to be. It seems that the implications on the ground are very similar to what we've seen before in other projects, so that the practice really changes in countries in the Mekong River basin, that environmental issues or land issues or food issues are taken more into account, so that we have a more integrated management of that resource. That doesn't seem to be the case. So it may not have it may not be politically, it may not have the political connotation of being a donor-created concepts that's imposed on the global south, but it doesn't seem to have much clout on the ground and much impact on the ground in terms of how approval processes of hydropower projects are done, or how local communities are treated. So it doesn't appear so far anyway to really have an impact on how these big projects and these large interventions, development interventions, are managed. That seems to be the case at the moment. So it's something that I think has maybe refashioned a little bit the discourse, or changed the discourse, maybe made it more diverse, or has pointed out issues that were perhaps missed out before the nexus concept became big. But in terms of the actual impact on the ground, it doesn't seem to be quite substantial. It doesn't seem to have changed anything in practice at the moment. And if that's something that you see in
the whole context has changed in the region. Actors and institutions are in a process of transition where the old actors have less traction in their language and discourses.
Yeah. it seems to be that by the fate of the Mekong River Commission, I think should be interesting, or the discussion around donor input and the significant reduction in donor funding of the Mekong River Commission.
Establishment of the new Mekong Lansang
Yep.
initiative in China.
Yeah. So it seems that the Mekong River Commission has never really been viable. I think the Mekong River Commission has tried to arbitrate in the Alifold dispute without any effect. It didn't have much impact on the Sayaburi decision-making process in terms of the PNPCA process. The same for Don Sahong. Really.
Actually, that is a good comment on Lisa. Did the MRC have any? The MRC have never really engaged with any tributary dams, only the mainstream. So any of those tributary ones they've kept a very distant. But even on the mainstream dams, they've not really had a great deal of.
I think the MRC was never. The fact that the MRC had no territorial rights, that member states weren't bound to the decisions by the MRC, is perhaps the most significant problem there. And also the fact that the MRC has always been outdone by the GMS, which has been where all the regional countries went to and where they have been interested in cooperating, and where there is a lot of activity around some of the GMS programs anyway. The MRC has always suffered from that. There have been talks about merging the MRC with the GMS or abandoning it altogether, and it seems that it's now slowly being abandoned, including processes of riparianization, etc. So decentralization, moving functions back into member countries, that the MRC is slowly disappearing. That appears to be the case at the moment.
Yep. We may have covered this before I arrived. I just wondered whether the government's own discourses on energy have evolved as a consequence of the growing challenges of hydro, and in particular whether there's been any rethinking of the future sources of energy security away from these sorts of conflicts and towards other sources. In Cambodia, for example, offshore gas. There's great potential in those areas. That would be much less intrusive and problematic. And there's a great economic price there, but also the environmental consequences, the community consequences will be much diminished. So there's still some official, but by comparison, the problems associated with it would in many respects potentially be a less problematic solution to the problem of energy security. So would it be, if the policy-making system, policy mind, was responsible enough?
I think no. I don't know very much about the offshore gas explorations, but in terms of acknowledging the environmental and social effects of hydropower dams and gearing the approval system towards taking that into account and finding alternative sources, that doesn't seem to be the case at all at the moment. So there are a lot of contentions around hydropower projects, and environmental activists and NGOs in Cambodia keep bringing it up, but the response by the government and by the Prime Minister himself is quite hostile every time. And attempts to put the NGOs on a leash have been there for quite some time as well. So this idea that the environmental and social costs are too high to realize this energy agenda, that doesn't seem to be in the mindset at all on the leading agencies in that program.
I did notice that one of your slides you said that one of the projects you postponed till after the election.
Yeah.
So I think you said that there's some responsibility going on there.
There is. I'm not sure why that is. I wonder that might have to do with the current political situation in Cambodia, which has been not the most stable one since the last election. So it might be that that's just a guess. It might be that the Prime Minister hopes that that political problem will be resolved in the next elections, and he will gain a majority again to push through projects. But that is only my guess. I don't know why that decision was made, but it might have to do with the currently quite volatile domestic political situation in the country. Other questions or comments? Or final comments, questions for Diana and Josephine? Okay, then we can conclude this. Thank you very much for coming.
Hello. Sorry, I only caught the last few minutes of your presentation.
Oh, no
I very
problem.
much enjoyed that. Nice all day, but nice to meet you. Deanna and I shared a panel this morning.